All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the second session. We're looking at web archiving and in español. We're looking at barriers to accessing and using web archives in Latin America. And we're joined today by Alan Colin-Arce and Professor Rosario Rogel-Salazar, Professor at the Faculty of Political and Social Sciences at Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Mexico, which I think I will call the UAEM. And they're from the research group Huellas Incomodas, also known as Uncomfortable Footprint in English. So this is a transnational project between researchers in Mexico and the United States, documenting and preserving images, videos, and web material from the student feminist movement. So our panelists have shared their presentation of their reflection and experience of running a web archiving project across 2 countries, and the thoughts about how this process could be made a little easier in the future. So I mean, Rosario, could I ask you to perhaps start us off with a little summary of the project and your reflections from that you presented in the presentation video?
Yeah, thank you very much. I prefer if Alan can give the brief summary. Yes, don't worry, but Alan, I don't know if you can give a brief summary about the project, please.
Yes, please go ahead.
Of course. Well, Huellas Incómodas is a digital preservation project that aims to document and preserve images and videos of feminist activism in small and mid-sized cities in Latin America. And in our presentation, we gave some social, economic, and linguistic limitations of the uptake of web archiving in Latin America, including the high cost of web archiving services, the fact that most of them are only in English and they are not available in Spanish, and also the fact that, for example, the metadata schemes are only available in English and, for example, in Archivit, and they do not allow the possibility of multilingual collections. And this creates the risk of a region like Latin America depending on foreign institutions to preserve its own web history. And this can also create a digital divide between the global north and the global south, where there are very few web archives.
Thank you, Colin. Could I ask our audience just to please ask any questions that they have about barriers to accessing and using web archives in Latin America in the Q&A tab. And yeah, I think we'll begin the Q&A now. So I'm just going to see if I can check our Q&A section. Don't see any questions yet, so you're immersing my prepared questions. But I'm really fascinated by this project because I think it's just really interesting to see 2 people who at the beginning were, I think it's fair to say, quite new to web archiving and just really getting some idea of what you took from the whole thing. So can I ask you if you've discovered anything that surprised you through building this collection?
Yes, I think we have a lot of it. First of all, to realize that there are very few initiatives about web archiving in Latin America. It is really surprising when you find something like this, because you say, no, probably I'm not looking okay, no, at the first time. And yes, and we were surprised, and we started to look deeper and deeper. And yes, it's really strange to find that there are very few people who is working in some topic in this area, I mean in Latin America. And we started to figure out why is this happening. Probably because of a lack of awareness in the libraries about the archiving, web archiving, no? Because there's a large tradition of archiving papers, no, but not digital archives. We have found some initiatives, but very few. Some of them in Brazil, very small, some small initiatives like this in Chile. But for example, in Mexico, there are very few, no. And I think it is strange to say that we are. I couldn't say pioneers, of course not, but I don't know, the first people who is starting to doing this. The other thing that is surprising us is that among the librarians area, I don't know, we are not librarians. No, this is not a thing that is a worry for them. We are at the political science faculty. I'm a sociology professor, and Alan was studying communication. And since this area, we're starting to identify this. I don't know, this area or this opportunity to research, but it is really strange to identify that there is not a topic for a librarian or library areas or library schools. We don't know why.
Well, I think you can call yourselves pioneers. No, I mean, I've got some questions in the Q&A now, so I'll just go to these. So the first we have here is from Brenda Ford, and she says, I really liked your presentation. It was mentioned that the Internet Archive site is only in English. Are there any talks with them to provide at least a Spanish section? So did your project speak to Archive-It or anyone during the project about Spanish translation?
Yes, we are having some conversations, but with the Archive-It team. And we have mentioned them some of the issues that we have found, for example, regarding the metadata, that it's only available in English. Sometimes diacritics don't show up on Archive-It, and we also tell them that. So we haven't discussed with the Internet Archive, but we have been in some conversations with Archive-It.
Great. I have another one here, which is a more general question. How far are Indigenous people and marginalised groups part of this effort, especially when it comes to discussions about what terms and words to use? So I suppose that's asking about whether you have any rules about the metadata, the descriptions you're creating as part of the project.
I don't know, in this very moment, not exactly, because this is a research project and we are only a research team at a medium university. In fact, this is not the most important university or in Mexico, no. The biggest one is UNAM, and we are not UNAM, no. Then, of course, we cannot make this kind of things like, I don't know, encourage Indigenous people or those kind of things. The thing that we have been working on is on feminist movements, no, because this was our first topic of interest of analyzing, no. This is not means that we are, I don't know, part of the movement or in some ways, but not exactly. The thing is that we wanted to try to archiving different websites of Latin America in this case, and we have a phase, for example, talking about terms or words to use. I can say something related with the feminist movement. For example, in I can remember and say, tell me, Alan, if I am making a mistake, but I think it was in early 20th century, I think in Mexico, for example, or in Latin America, that the word feminicide started to put in the conversation because it was not exactly like a law. Then in some countries it's a law, the word feminicide. I mean, not only homicide, but mainly feminicide, for example. And we needed to identify some differences between these kind of words, these different words in Spanish, because it's not exactly the same as some terms, for example, when it is used by feminist collectives or feminist movements. Another big problem that we had is how to say, for example, when movements, the feminist movements go out to the street and they make, I don't know, a mobilization, and they start to paint the walls, asking for, I don't know, for some demands. most of the time it is confused with graffiti, but this is not exactly graffiti, no? This is our demands. Because of that, we use the word pintas. And because of that, the name of our research group is Huellas Incómodas, which in Spanish means uncomfortable footprints. The uncomfortable footprints that are put in the main buildings, for example, with a feminist movement. But yes, we needed to discuss the different ways of terms, mainly in this particular case of feminist movements. We are not working in this moment with I don't know, indigenous groups or marginalized or marginalized groups, but one part of our project is related with Ecuador, because we are parts of this project in Ecuador. But for example, in Ecuador, the feminist movement has some indigenous complement, or no complement, or issues, some indigenous issues, not, for example, the feminist movement in Mexico. We have identified this when we started to make the analysis of the data.
Oh, fascinating answer. Thank you. I have another question here from Jose Carlos Cardan Medina. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. My question is, are legal problems or lack of legislation in this field a further barrier to create web archives in Latin American countries? And he's snuck in another one. Has Mexico or Colombia specific legislation on non-print legal deposit? So yes, sorry, I'll just ask you the first one. So he's asking about legal problems, or are legal problems or lack of legislation in this field a further barrier to create web archives in Latin American countries? Start there.
Yeah, I think that Mexican legislation has similar limitations as in other countries like Spain or Chile, where they cannot make, if, for example, the Mexican National Archive decided to start web archiving, they wouldn't be able to have everything available online. For example, if they archive a newspaper or something that wasn't published by the Mexican government, I think they would have some issues and they wouldn't be able to put that openly. But that's why it's important that also, for example, Latin American universities also start web archiving, because they have more margin to collect those materials. And that's what a lot of universities, for example, in the US and Canada do, that they have small curated archived collections where they can store these copies of websites that may be from activist organizations or news media, and they can have it publicly available online, unlike national archives that have more strict regulations.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head if I can remember where the list of libraries with national libraries empowered to undertake non-print legal deposit is. I think that's something you would find in IFLA. IFLA.org, IFLA.org, the International Library Association. I will have a look. Right, I think we have one or two other questions. Let me just see. Oh, hello. Right, hello. Oh, hang on, that's a comment. I will just pass on to
may I say something related with the question of Jose Carlos Cardan Medina? We are in Mexico, and we really don't know the Colombia legislation or other Latin American countries' legislation. But the thing that we have identified is that, for example, even exists a legislation about deposit of digital archives. There's a big problem that we found, for example, when we try to make the web archive for Latin American feminist movements. And this is one step before. We identified that there are very few feminist movements that have developed a web page. This is strange. At the very beginning, this is another thing that surprised us, no? Because we say, why is happening this? There's a huge of feminist movements, but they don't have web pages. You know, they prefer to use the social media, I don't know, Facebook mainly, or Instagram or whatever, in order to show up or to put all their demands, but they don't have web pages. And we started to think that this is because they don't have enough money and they don't know how to develop the web pages, probably because a lack of digital skills, or probably because they think it is really expensive. But there's very few web pages developed by feminist movements. We think that this could be happening with other movements, and because of that, we started to make, as part of our project, different workshops in order to try to encourage the movements, in order to explain why it is important to develop a web page. And after that, we can archive it, because can you imagine, even if exists a law that say, okay, you need to deposit the digital archives, yes, but if you don't have web pages, no, this law is not working. We needed to start to working one step on before. I hope this could be, I don't know, understanding.
Thank you so much for your answer. That a really wonderful answer. I think just thank you both very much for taking part, and just for to hear about this wonderful new collection, which preserves such important social history. There were lots more questions. I hope Olga can maybe share, and your contacts are shared within the presentation. But just thanks everyone, that's been really wonderful.